One of the most interesting circuits on the Formula One calendar, for me at least, is the Hungaroring. Its low-speed, high-downforce nature creates a really interesting set of challenges for the teams, which is also exacerbated by the really high temperature you typically get in that part of Europe at this time of year. And that means the teams have to, at the start of the season, design their cars with the Hungaroring in mind. The low average speed of the circuit and that high temperature mean that the cars have to be designed with a special suite of additional cooling systems and openings on the bodywork. Here you can see what Alfa Romeo have done. There's two sets of gills. Ferrari, though, it's a far simpler layout. Three small openings behind a large opening behind the halo. A lot of teams going for that approach as well. Mercedes, just a set of gills, no opening behind the halo. Williams, again, just this set of gills, and this is all just to let that hot air out from underneath that bodywork and just keep the car cooling going as much as they need to. Now, Aston Martin, I'm going to pause this slightly here on the Aston Martin because they've gone for quite a significantly different approach to Mercedes, which might surprise a few people. Now, if you're wondering why the teams are taking different options and different design solutions to this, and surely cooling a Formula One car isn't that difficult, well, Aston Martin had some problems at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, which was slightly hotter than expected. And as I understand it, Sebastian Vettel's car had to be retired because the power unit was getting a bit too hot in the closing stages of the race. They've opted to open up the bodywork here just behind the halo and gone for those very open guild section, probably one of the most open you could see, and it's actually quite interesting to take a look down the inside of those holes. Haas, very similar to some of the other teams, pretty standard layout, which you tend to expect from Haas at the moment. Set of guilds and an opening behind the halo. Renault, or the Renault-powered Alpine team, have a much different approach, though, closer to Ferrari, with just two small openings at the leading edge of that halo mount, and then one very large opening behind the halo, behind the fuel company's logo. This opening here you see in the bottom of the screen, that's nothing to do with cooling, that's actually the fuel filler cap, just open in the pits so the teams can have a look at it. But that's not all you see on the cars as the teams try to manage that cooling approach for the Hungaroring. You'll also see at the rear of the car some pretty substantial differences. Red Bull here in the Styrian Grand Prix with their sort of low temperature version. Austria's not particularly a hot circuit, but then compare that to the version in Hungary. Use the upper wishbone as a reference point. You can see how much more open the rear bodywork of the car is, possibly even by as much as 25% more open. And that's a really important factor because the teams have got to get this right. If you open the bodywork up too much, it creates a whole load of aerodynamic drag, slows the car down on a lap. If you close it up too much, components underneath the bodywork start to get too hot. That can damage the power unit, reducing its life, or even cause it to fail. In fact, a few years ago, we used to see the Red Bull regularly coming in with the bodywork either on fire or heavily scorched. Adrian Newey said it wasn't a cooling problem, a heating problem, it was a catching fire problem when I asked him about it, which I thought was a little bit of a subtle differentiation. But you see this approach on different cars as well. Alpine in the Austrian circuit decided to go for quite an open rear bodywork. We're not quite sure why that was. They have a much tighter bodywork. Here in Hungary, you can see they've also got the bodywork quite significantly open. There's another version of the Alpine bodywork which closes up that rear end. We saw it in pre-season testing, and that's probably about 25% cooler, even 50% sort of smaller opening at the back, and that's how the teams are balancing off what works in terms of opening up the bodywork and playing that off, that trade-off between drag, speed and cooling the car down and making sure it doesn't overheat. So after taking a look at the bodywork on the outside, I'm joined by Craig Scarborough. And Craig, we're going to take a look at what's going on underneath the bodywork because that's actually quite interesting as well, isn't it?
It is, and this is really what this is all basically about. So I've got some of my drawings, and what we've got here, first of all, let's just talk about what needs cooling. So the main thing that needs cooling is the V6 engine, which has got its water and oil, and they have radiators typically in the right-hand side pod for the engine, simply because the plumbing's a little bit easier. Then you've got the charge air, which is the air that's compressed by the turbocharger. It's very hot, you create more power if you can cool that down. So you'll have an intercooler in the left-hand side pod. And then you've got your energy recovery system, system, but also your hydraulics and your gearbox. And the designers will scatter those coolers around the car depending on what their aero concept is. So you'll have some on the centre line and some of them doubled up with the rest of the side pods. So that is what gets hot. And remember, these cars are producing 1,000 horsepower. And even though they're very efficient, lots of heat is being produced. So then you need to get air passing through this. So if we have a quick look at the next picture.
Well, before we do that, I was just going to point out, because the main duct for cooling these cars is in the side pods here. And now that doesn't change shape at the Hungaroring. The teams basically leave the side pod ducts openings as they are. They're sort of defined by the side impact structures as well. Then you've got the ducts up on the roll hoop which feed those centre line coolers. So moving on, there are some other bits that you can play with in terms of opening up the car though, aren't there?
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive. I think most people would think if you need to get more air to cool, then you need bigger inlets. But as you say, the inlets in the side pod and around the roll hoop are fixed. And teams very rarely play about with the size of them through the season. It has happened occasionally, but not that often. When the regulations changed way back in 2009, they stopped teams having the chimneys and the big grills and louvers that were fitted throughout the side pods and limited the cooling outlets to just a few areas. So you have the one by the driver's shoulder. There's also one at the very front of the side pod, which is fallen out of favour now. There's one along the centre line of the shark fin, again, hasn't been used for many years, and even one down low in that kind of sticky up zone, 5 centimetres above the floor, low down in the Coke bottle area that's allowed as well. So the main area tends to be what we call the Coke bottle exit, what you were showing back there as well. And again, this has changed over the years. Now that Coke bottle exit, as you saw from those rear views, is brought up and it's trying to blow straight through the middle of the rear wing because they don't want it to go anywhere near the diffuser or near the top rear wing. It's trying to go in through the middle where it's going to do the least damage, because the air, once it's passed through the side pods, through the radiators and out through all that heat shielding, is wasted. There's no energy in it to do any useful aerodynamic work. So that's why the back end shape is there.
Well, it's hot, messy air, isn't it? And that comes out the back of the car. You can sometimes see the heat haze coming off it. That's
Exactly.
not just off the exhaust. You can see that hot, messy air driving out the back of the car. That's dirty air. You don't want that anywhere near your wings. It's unpleasant for the rest of the car. But the way it comes out of the car, we've seen quite a lot of change from team to team. We saw it earlier on with those different openings, but we've seen teams do some innovative things in that area as well, haven't we?
Yeah, so one of the key things that you notice in all of the pictures that we've seen so far is that the cooling left to right is different. And particularly is noticeable, not just on these kind of shoulder openings, but on the Coke bottle exit. So this is a drawing where you see a much larger opening here, much smaller there. And people think, well, why is this? Is it because the circuit is a left-hander circuit or right-hander circuit? It's as simple as the fact that what's cooled in that side pod is different to what's cooled in this side pod. They're not symmetrical. So at some circuits, you may want to factor in how much heat the hybrid system is going to produce. Therefore, the left-hand side pod needs a smaller opening. Other circuits, engine power or intercooler size, all that is factored, and the teams will only produce the size of opening that's needed for each side pod and the centre line. Therefore, they'll have these asymmetric setups to try and minimise that drag while getting the perfect amount of cooling for the car.
Yeah, and I remember looking back over the years, you've seen some strange arrangements. I read on old McLaren, we used to call it the Quasimodo because it had an opening on one side and nothing on the other at all. Quite ugly, but quite effective. And that's the nature of cooling systems in Formula One. At the start of every season, as I say, the teams are already thinking about how to deal with the Hungaroring. But with new circuits coming onto the Formula One calendar, like Zandvoort, where it could get quite hot, and the new Saudi Arabian circuit, those tracks could create even more of a cooling challenge than Hungary. Let's wait and see, but it looks like the teams are pretty well prepared.